Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining in on our webinar today, Making the Leap Transitioning to College. We'll begin promptly at 12:15. We're just going to hold off a couple minutes, allow people to enter the room. So we will begin promptly at 12:15, and I'll see you all in a minute.
We're not familiar. Good. We are the first four-year college for students with learning differences in the United States. We're about 40 minutes outside of Orlando, 500 students, great academic programs, but I'm not going to talk a lot about that. You could stop by our booths later today. I'm here to try my best to talk about the transition to college for students who learn differently in 30 minutes. I have dedicated 15 years of my career to this area, working both with high school students and now in the college area. So today, what I'm going to try to do is provide a very brief overview of some major changes from high school to college for this population of students. My guess is you've heard a lot of this before. My goal is to kind of whittle this down to 4 main areas to be cognizant of. Then from there, I'm going to talk a little bit about some stages and some domains that I hope that you all can start working on in order to get ready for what should be one of the best times in your life. And then finally, what are some practical things that you could take away from this in order to employ right now to get ready for that transition? As always, please ask as many questions as you'd like. My contact information is going to be at the end, so happy to talk to you after this as well. Let's start by just reframing the high school model a little bit. You can't really understand college until you understand what's actually happening in the high school area. And when I look at high school, both as a past director of one and now working really closely with a bunch of different schools in the United States, one of the big things that typically trips up that transition is that in high school, students have had barriers removed for them, whether that's through different accommodations or different modifications or exemptions. So that means that if we're really struggling with something, the school is going to work really hard to either alter or remove a barrier so that you're more successful. And that's because high school is a very student-centered approach to learning. There are people that are exclusively dedicated to understanding you, your profile, and your needs. You are at that epicenter of that high school. And for you parents, you are in the driver's seat of all communication. It is expected that schools will be communicating with you around qualitative and quantitative data, all around how your student is performing in and out of the classroom. But what we do know, one of the biggest kind of hiccups is that there's not a lot of understanding about what all of the possibilities are after high school. When I started my career about 15 years ago in this field, there was about 3 or 4 different high school to college options for students who wanted to go to college. Now there's nearly 100 different colleges in the United States dedicated to serving the student population, whether it's exclusively through Beacon or through small auxiliary programs. And the fact that we have a dedicated fair all to this speaks volumes about the opportunities, but also sometimes the lack of awareness. So if that's high school, how does that flip into college? So what we then see in college is, remember, high school, we're removing barriers. College, we are standardizing performances, meaning there is a baseline expectation that you are expected to meet no matter your profile, no matter your needs. And they do that by removing any modifications. So that's really important. I would say, yes, it's really critical to learn about your accommodations, but if you're not familiar with how your learning environment has been modified, completely changed, it's going to make college really tricky, because college is all about leveling that playing field by removing modifications. And where high school is more student-centered, college is way more process-centered. There are models and steps that the student will have to understand and take in order to get support. And we're going to talk a little bit about that in a couple of minutes. Communication goes from a parent model to a student model. So We could talk a lot about communication, but unless the student signs a FERPA waiver, general education records will not be disclosed. And really, there's not a lot of qualitative data in college. It's usually grades, attendance, and did they pay their bill. And finally, in college, while you had a lot of specialized support in high school, there's not a lot of awareness in higher education about how to differentiate instruction for students who learn differently. So you might be coming from a high school with a fantastic special education department and teachers that know how to teach to the student. In college, the instructor is going to teach to the class and not differentiate for somebody who's neurodiverse. Housing offices, career offices, they're not specialized in this area. So it's a pretty big shift. But I think altogether, what we know is that we need to do more in order to inform people about the experience for students who learn differently. And part of the way that we have to do that is by getting really ready for this transition. The transition to college is going to be both the most exciting time of a student's life and probably the most scary, because we don't really know what to expect. I want everyone to think about what it feels like to experience change, whether it's change in environment, you're moving, change in jobs, change in teachers. What we know is that when change happens, we naturally have an increase in stress and anxiety. We might avoid things. And that is a very typical response to what we call an adjustment. And college, for a lot of you students that I hope are listening to this, is your first big adjustment as you enter adulthood. So in order to prepare for adjustments, I wanted to teach you about 4 main strategies and areas for you to consider in order to feel more prepared for change, because change will happen, change will come, but you actually do have the tools at your disposal to make that adjustment to college a little easier. Everyone that's out there, if you say that the first thing that the student needs to work on is self-advocacy, I'm going to tell you, you're wrong. We cannot just start at self-advocacy. We actually have to start at the bare bone beginning to prepare for college. The first thing that students need to do is understand themselves, their educational environments, as well as the requirements in college. So students, do you know your accommodations in high school? Do you know your modifications? Do you know how much support you get, whether it is to complete an assignment at school or at home? Parents, do you know the same questions? Schools, do you know how the student is performing in relation to everyone else? And self-awareness is also about environmental awareness. Do you know about general education requirements in college? Do you know about things like satisfactory academic progress or office hours? Do you understand the change in educational requirements and consequences in college? So in order to really do anything to prepare for that adjustment, the first thing that you have to do is both know yourself and know what's going to be expected of you when you enter college. And I'm going to give you some hints about that as we go. The second thing I want you to do is work on what we call our executive functioning skills. Right now, a lot of students are really comfortable with platforms like Canvas, Google Classroom, Schoology. When you go to college, all of those systems are going to change. Students, if you don't have your own internal executive functioning systems to help you with planning your assignments, tracking changes, college has a lot of changes, reminding yourself around deadlines, you're not going to have a platform to do it for you. Professors in college are not required to all do the same thing in terms of organizing your materials or providing you prompts to complete tasks. It's critical, students, that you both know how to use those systems, but also have your own system to rely on. In order to be successful in college and prepare for that adjustment, we also have to be aware of our emotions. Mental health is one of the most important things to cover in college transitions, no matter your profile. Do you understand your triggers? Do you have healthy coping strategies? Do you know who your appropriate resources are when you're feeling really stressed? And most importantly, even when you're stressed, do you still attend required events? Do you not skip classes, or avoid responsibilities. Once you're able to go through each of those 3 areas, you are then ready to self-advocate. And I'm going to illustrate what advocacy looks like. And that's what gets you to adjust and prepare for college life. So if you don't take anything else from this next 20 minutes I have with you, please remember to know yourself, increase your executive functioning skills, be able to cope during times of stress, and then you'll be able to self-advocate. And if you can get through those 4 stages, that adjustment to college is going to be a little easier. So let's dive a little deeper now into how you might want to do that. First, my job, absolutely as an educator, is to give you some homework. It is really critical that you do homework on yourself. And I know that sounds really weird, but let me talk about what that might look like. First, if you currently have an IEP, a 504 plan, an accommodation plan, I want you to sit down with somebody and really identify what your accommodations are and what your modifications are. And then with that trusted professional, whether it's a parent, a counselor, a case manager, even somebody like me at a college, I'd be happy to do this with you. I want you then to figure out what will and will not apply to college. You can go on a lot of great websites to look at typical college accommodations, and that's going to help you to create both an understanding of your needs and an understanding of the barriers and limits in college accessibility. I want you then to research the documentation requirements for all of the colleges you're applying for. College is not a one-size-fits-all model. One college might require something to get services, another college might require something else. But it's really critical that if you need things like updated testing, that you get on that a little earlier. A lot of colleges now have what we call additive programs. That means there is this subset of services that are part of the college that you have to apply for and pay for. And what I would like you to do is critically evaluate them because they're all not the same. Who's supporting the students in the program? Are they just supporting you academically? Are they helping you socially? How long is the service? Some schools have 1-year programs, some schools have 4-year programs. And then as you're doing this, I want you to constantly ask yourself, what is my current professional support team? Do I have tutors? Do I have executive functioning coaches? Do I have counselors? And how do I create a transition plan from this set of services in order to get my next set of services? You can't just go from having like 10 awesome professionals helping you to 0. So it's really critical that you evaluate the frequency and intensity of all of the services that you're getting and what you may and may not get in college, and how are you going to bridge from one place to another. And the way you're going to do that is by visiting and evaluating colleges. I am of the belief system that it is okay to tour and visit as many colleges as you want, because that is how you inform your decisions. Think about it like dating to get married. You're going to date a lot of people before you get married, and visiting colleges is no different. Tour those colleges and ask the tough questions, because that's how you're really going to be able to identify what your needs are and how you're going to be able to transition. So look at things like depth of academic services, like who are these people that are supporting you in your writing? Is it professionals or is it a peer? Think about who else is available outside structured services, and really, and most critically, evaluate their social emotional support. How many counselors do they have on a college campus? What kind of structured programming is there? And think through, if you're somebody that struggles with change, what are your bridge programs like? Are there early orientation options to get to know the college a little earlier? Like at Beacon, we have our virtual navigator prep program that allows for students to get ready for colleges 9 months before they get here. Because the longer you're involved in the college transition process, the better you're going to do. And when you're at a college campus, please do not feel ashamed to ask really critical questions that relate to people with disabilities. Things like, how am I going to get my accommodations? How does disability services support other offices? Does your career office, are they aware of the American with Disabilities Act and what I might need? When you're looking at colleges, you can't just look at year 1, you have to look at all 4 years. So again, don't be afraid to ask the tough questions. Because what you're going to have to do is self-advocate at a different level. So you remember when I said to you earlier that if self-advocacy is the skill that you need to learn first, and I said you're wrong, well, this is why. When we tell a student to self-advocate in college, we're asking them to start a series of skills that don't come naturally. So let's just say that I am struggling in college to finish a paper that is due on Friday and it's Thursday afternoon. Well, the first thing I need to do is recognize that I'm even struggling. So that is an executive functioning skill. Can I monitor for myself that I'm having difficulties initiating a task, maybe understanding the task? I need to also be able to then identify what is the specific thing that I need help in. Because you can't go to someone in college who doesn't really know you and just say, I'm having difficulties with my paper. That can mean 100 different things. So by recognizing I'm struggling, identifying some skills that I need support in will allow for you to develop an action plan that's sequenced in order for you to initiate the problem-solving steps. Because then you need to figure out, well, who's available? If it's Thursday afternoon, my professor is probably home. They might not respond to my email. Who are my available resources at my college to support me? Is my writing center open? Is my TA available? Do I have a peer that could help me? Do I have an academic advisor that's available? I then need to understand how to communicate with these people. These are new relationships. So when I am introducing myself, how do I do that in an appropriate way to get my needs met? And we know that asking for help is scary and stressful. So how do we also self-manage, right? That third strategy of understanding how to cope. How do you manage your emotions during times of upset, during times of confusion? And then what do you do if your plan doesn't work? What happens if you go to that writing center and there's no openings? Or if you've been working with Johnny in the writing center, but he's not available anymore. So you have to be flexible and create new plans in case your original plan doesn't work. So it's really important that we remember that going to college, that self-advocacy is not that easy. So students, I want you to hear that I hear you, that it's not that easy to ask for help. So if we are working on self-advocacy to get you ready for college, these are the skills that you're going to need to employ in order to navigate the system. Because the system in college is a little crazy. We often say that students don't get accommodations in college because of stigma. They feel ashamed asking for help. They feel ashamed to get things like extended time, notes provided, things like that. But I think it's really critical at this point that I stop and say, asking for help in college and getting an accommodation in college is a very difficult process. So to get things like extended time on an exam, the use of a computer for written assignments, notes provided for audio lectures, even a calculator sometimes for a math or science class, students will have to do the following. You're first and foremost going to have to research the school's process. Again, college, not a one-size-fits-all. Every college does that differently. So once you choose your college, you have to really research what you're going to need to do in order to get those accommodations. There's typically paperwork that the student will have to fill out by a deadline, and then submit updated testing. So that either could be a psychoeducational evaluation, a neuropsychological evaluation. Some schools will allow for you to submit an IEP, some will not. Most require that documentation to be within 3 years of your entrance date to college. So you're going to submit that to this disabilities office. And then before you really get there, you're going to start scheduling that meeting with them, because what you're going to have to do is substantiate your needs. You're going to have to be able to, when you go to that meeting, to say that my name is Alex, I have ADHD, and these are what I call my functional limitations. That is like the disability jargon of the day for you. You're going to have to show how your disability impacts your functioning and how an accommodation will help you meet those standards to make it that even playing field. So if you've never done that prior, that's good practice to get going. Once you get that meeting done, and really quickly, the reason the first three are in green is that's where the student is doing this with support like a school or parents. Once you get into the blue blocks, that's when the student is doing this by themselves. So after you meet with that person, usually the first couple days of your semester, you're going to get a letter, and that letter is going to tell you all of your accommodations. You then are going to go to your professor, and then you're going to tell each of the professors what your accommodations are by giving them the letter. Every time you want to use those accommodations, you are going to have to self-advocate. You're going to have to make sure that for one exam that you're following the guidelines and the deadlines to get that accommodation. So if you want to get extended time, for example, on your midterms, you typically have to let your professor know that you want to use your accommodation. You typically have to self-schedule with the Office of Disabilities for separate testing. And then you have to find an alternative time to complete your exam within a certain amount of days. So a lot of steps just to get that one accommodation. Every time you're using these accommodations, you should always be evaluating if it's working for you or not. And then every year, you're going to have to reapply, but every semester, you need to get new letters because you're going to get 4 or 5 new professors. So students, the reason I'm probably scaring you is because you have to know this, because this is what will empower you to get access to the rightful accommodations that you deserve. Parents, I am telling you this because these are the steps that you're going to have to support your child in as they're navigating this. And schools, if you could replicate some of this now, they are going to be more prepared for that transition moving forward. Because college is freaking confusing. We have things like accommodations, we have services, we have programs, we have tutors. There's a lot of things going on at college that we need to be able to decipher between and support our students on. And for students who learn differently, that transition gets more complicated because we're throwing more things at you, like the accommodation process. So just to review, you are eligible for accommodations under the American with Disabilities Act, and that's only open to students who qualify under the American with Disabilities Act. That is very different than obtaining services at your college. Services are things like the writing center, tutoring. It might be a math center, a language center. That's offered to everybody. And really, because of COVID, more and more students are seeking out that service. So it's a little more competitive. It is not related to disability services at all. So just because you're getting help in a writing center does not mean that they understand learning disabilities. So you're going to have to do a little bit of education about your needs. And services and accommodations is very different than a program. That is an external area of a college that likely requires disabilities, but often closed because of enrollment. Typically, you might get accommodations as part of that program. You might get special tutoring. You might get other programs, but again, it's an extended fee. So you're paying for more services on top of the cost of tuition. So if tuition is like $60,000 a year, room and board is another $8,000, you're paying $68,000. Now we're going to add another $10,000 a year for this program. So now your total tuition with everything is $78,000 a year. It's really important that you understand that yes, special education is expensive, and 2, you have to know what you're paying for. Everyone's entitled to accommodations for the American with Disabilities Act. Please do not get excited when a school tells you that they offer accommodations. They should be offering you accommodations. That's their legal responsibility. When they talk about services, do your homework. Who's doing it? How do you get them? And if you're paying for a program, ask the question, what are you paying for? And I want you also to remember that college is also about the fun stuff, planning for unstructured time. College for students is great because you spend about maybe 2 to 3 hours a day in class, and you got like 12 hours to kill outside of class. That could be really exciting and really terrifying. We know that students with difficulties with impulse control, or just like any 18-year-olds going to college, That unstructured time is how you develop friendships. It's also how you can get yourself into a little bit of trouble if you don't have those executive functioning skills to block out your schedule and know what to do in the daytime when you're free. It's also important then for you to think about that, because college is more than just academics, to figure out how does a college support a student socially and emotionally in a college environment. I want you to think about what are your housing options when you go to school. Do they have single room accommodations? And what does that entail? Do they have these pre-orientation or jumpstart programs? The more effort a school puts in to that pre-entry, the more you'll feel socially ready for that transition. What does their first year experience look like? At Beacon, for example, we have a really unique model for our first year students because we recognize that if we can incorporate them into our community earlier, they're going to be more successful in their post-freshman year launch. What do other programs do to support students in their first year? And then how do they transition them outside of that increased support? Do they have peer mentoring? Is there role models? Is there leadership opportunities? And finally, and really important, what does the student population look like? What's the structure of programming happening? Are they relying on Greek life and athletics to support students? Is it a commuter school? Sometimes students tend to start at a community college and they don't get that fostered social development because there's not physical spaces to connect. So you have to think about how many students are staying on campus. How many RAs are on campus? What does the social environment look like? Because we know for students who learn differently, that might come with some co-occurring issues like anxiety or stress. Feeling socially connected will actually increase their academic performance. There's thousands of theories about this, but it really whittles down to the more you can stay on campus and get involved in interest-based activities, the better you're going to feel and the better you're going to do. So as we conclude, I want you to start putting in your questions now. I want you to think about a few final tips to kind of get you ready for this transition. First, gather data from a lot of different people. There should be a team of about 4 people looking at students to give perspectives on their performance and their abilities in order for you to start understanding what type of colleges might work for you. Because again, remember, it's not a one-size-fits-all model in higher education. You can't assume that colleges are doing the same thing. So if you've researched one Office of Disability Services, you've researched one Office of Disability Services. You have to really look at every single school in isolation and then comparatively. You have to be able to prioritize needs. No school is going to fit every desire that you have. So remember to prioritize your needs and then practice, practice, practice. When you practice these skills, the closer you get into the transition, I want you to be able to generalize it to where you're going next. So if you're learning problem-solving skills now, what does that skill look like if you attend a Beacon College or an Ohio State or a UCLA or a community college? Because certain problems like struggling in your residence hall, at our school, it's going to look different than somebody else and somebody else. And if we can decrease that guesswork, that transition is going to be a lot easier. So at this time, I'm going to open this up to questions. Again, if you want to schedule even just some time with me one-on-one, you can go to beaconcollege.edu/Alex, and you can connect with us today at our booths. We also have some really cool opportunities coming up that shamelessly I'm going to plug. I apologize. If you want to learn more about the student experience at Beacon, we have a virtual discovery day on Saturday. We're also doing an intro to college writing course for high school seniors graduating to give you a taste of what a college class might be like. And then if you would like an immersive opportunity to proactively prepare for college, we do have a summer program for 160 students in Florida. And we have an info session on that at March 9th. So Alex, I turn it over to you, I guess.
Thank you so much, Alex. That was a wonderful presentation. We're like you said, we're going to go over some questions now. Please, everybody, feel free. There's a Q&A box at the bottom of the toolbar that you can use to answer questions. We're going to spend about 10 to 15 minutes answering through some questions. So, some have already been thrown in there, which I will ask over to you, Alex. The first one is, can you repeat the 4 things needed from the beginning of your presentation? And what slide I believe they're referring to is preparing for the transition. So what were some of the bullet points on what students should be preparing for there?
Yeah, so there are those 4 stages. So stage number 1 is self-awareness, awareness of myself, awareness of others, awareness of environment. Stage 2 is increasing that executive functioning, knowing that you have your own system to support you. Stage 3, managing those setbacks, developing emotional regulation skills. Stage 4 would be those self-advocacy skills. Remember that whole arrow in that process.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Thank you. Moving on to another question. This one might be a little detailed. What are the typical psychoeducational testing requirement dates? Was it 3 years from the admission date or actual start date?
Great, sure. So for that, every school does it a little differently. I see it more of typical year of entry. So if you're entering college this fall in 2023, you should have testing from 2020 or more recent.
Great, thank you. That's a great question. I have another question here from a Peg. Should the meeting with Office of Disability Services to discuss needs occur before or after you apply and get accepted?
Either. I would suggest before. So if you because what you're going to want to do when you go to a disability services is really ask about the process. So if the process, for example, is if you want to get extended time, you want to know what is the Office of Disability Services going to do on their end, what is the student responsible, and what's the process of obtaining that? Because that process is not going to change at that school, even if a person does. And that process is going to look different than another school. So I say if you're going to tour a campus, try your best to have a meeting with disability services or schedule it separately. And what you're asking specifically for is, what are the typical accommodations you receive? I wouldn't give them your testing. Don't share too much information with them. What are the typical accommodations that you're going to give? And what is the process of how students obtain it? And how does your office help?
Great, thank you. And then just a follow-up question there. When in the college search process, do you recommend revealing disability service needs?
Oh, that is everyone has their thoughts about this. My philosophy is immediately. If you start talking to a school and they retract anything once you disclose your needs, then it's not going to be an environment that you're going to want to be part of. I think I've been to college campuses where admission officers unfortunately have not been very open, and that's a flavor, that's a taste of what the college might be like. So there is nothing wrong with having a learning difference. It's about 20% of a student population at a college. So if they are, if you get any negative response from that, in my philosophical opinion, it's not the school for you.
Great. That's a great explanation. I have another question here, and I guess this one involves a little bit of international law. Do you know if Canada has similar laws like the ADA? Do you know if Canada's systems are similar to the ones you described?
I don't, but if you look at me, I'm looking at the internet as I'm doing this. I don't know. We tend, I don't know. So I'm not even going to pretend that I do know. They do have something called the Accessible Canada Act. So I would research that, the Accessible Canada Act, and how that applies to college. But I do know that there is no college in Canada like a Beacon College.
Good answer there. I have one more question here. What is the best way to identify schools who provide excellent services for students with disabilities? Is there a general resource that identifies what is available at different colleges?
So it's an evolving list. So you can always just do general research of like best colleges for students who learn differently, best colleges for students with ADHD. A lot of it does depend on the program director. So I have seen solid ones that have been long established for years. Salt Center at University of Arizona, for example.
Mhm.
I've seen newer ones come up where the program director leaves and the program becomes defunct. The best way, in my opinion, is for you to actually see it yourself and get on the phone, because it's somebody else's opinion about a disabilities program.
Right. Excellent. Okay, another question came in here. What are a couple of basic questions you would ask at a college fair to get an idea of what their schools are like for kids with disabilities? And, we have our virtual fair that we're going on today, so I think this question is very good for everybody listening in.
Absolutely. So remember, when you're going to a college fair, you're talking to admissions officers, not educational specialists or accessibility service specialists. So my first question would be, how does the admissions office work with disability services? How does disability services work with faculty and professors? Asking around collaboration will tell you a lot about the culture of inclusivity. Oh, another one really quickly. I could do this all day. How does neurodiversity fit in to a college's diversity, equity, and inclusion framework? See how they answer that one.
Wow, you're giving them a tough one. I like that.
That's a tough one. But these are things that you have to remember. You are entitled to feel included and part of a community, never feel shameful. So it's really okay to ask the tough questions. And if they don't know the answer, which is also okay, remember, not everybody's going to know the answers to this. They should be able to say, that's a really good question. Let me kind of come back and, find out the answer and talk to you about it further. Or it's a problem that I don't know. Let me talk to you about it.
Great. That's excellent. Okay, so we're coming on, and if anyone else has any last minute questions, feel free to throw them in the chat. We'll be more than happy to ask our wonderful host Alex here. Just listening in on your presentation, Alex, I actually have a question or two that I think might be pertinent for everyone, especially for parents. What is the best way to support their child through this process as they begin preparing to go through college and have an idea of, what they need to do, the steps they need to take? How, as a parent, do they best support them?
So my first suggestion is always to be very upfront about the process. Do not engage in a secretive process that doesn't include your student. So it has to really be a collaborative effort. And I think it's really important to start with a baseline conversation about here are my expectations of what I think you need. What are your expectations? Like, we are now negotiating our areas of interests and our needs, which is exactly starting that conversation about self-monitoring. That's important. And now is the time, senior year is the time to get students more involved in like the IEP process, make sure they're sitting in on a lot of these meetings. It's really about exposure.
Great. And we have one more question coming in. This will be the last question that we'll take from a Debbie. Is it mostly small private schools that have great disability services? We're really only looking at larger public universities. So I'm kind of broaden this question. In your opinion, Alex, what type of universities are really good with their disability services?
Definitely smaller colleges that have the funds to employ multiple disability officers. I think what I'm seeing across the board in larger state universities and it really depends geographically, is sometimes disability services is cut to one person, and that's really problematic. So I would look at, there are fantastic public universities out there though that have excellent services. Look at how many people work in an office given the number of students at the college. If there's one disability officer for 10,000 students, it will tell you about how much support a student will get. But I've seen both excellent public schools and crummy private schools. It really depends on how the institution prioritizes the need of people with disabilities.
Wow, that was wonderful. Well, Alex, I'm sure everyone in the audience is giving you a virtual round of applause. You did a wonderful job today. Unfortunately, that is all of our time. Alex, once again, thank you so much. And for everyone listening in, be sure to explore the learning differences options in our virtual college fair. We have interactive booths where you can watch videos, download material, and chat with administrative representatives. We're expecting representatives to be in their virtual booths from now until 2 p.m. And then later this evening, 6:30 to 8:30 p.m. Eastern time. You'll also find that some booths might have scheduled their own live stream where they might want to have presentations of their own. So you can feel free to visit those today or come back while the event is live to enjoy those experiences. That does include our expert presentation, Making the Leap, Transitioning to College. Remember, you can come back to the education sessions page at any time to watch this recording. Thank you all so much. Thank you, Alex, once again, and I hope you all have a nice day. Goodbye.
Bye.